The muddy water was rising faster than Wyatt Vandermeer had ever seen in her 22 years, and she knew with absolute certainty that she was about to die in this God-forsaken desert canyon, somewhere between Bisbee, Arizona Territory, and the Mexican border in the scorching summer of 1887. She had been riding her mare along what she thought was a dry creek bed when the wall of water came roaring around the bend like a living thing, all churning brown fury and debris. The horse had reared and thrown her before bolting for higher ground, leaving Wyatt scrambling up the rocky canyon wall with water already swirling around her ankles. Now she clung to an outcropping of rock that was crumbling under her fingers, the flood rising inch by terrifying inch, and she could feel her grip weakening. That was when she saw him, a cowboy on a paint horse racing along the rim of the canyon above her, his dark hair flying behind him as he urged his mount forward. He was shouting something she could not hear over the roar of the water, and then he was swinging down from his saddle with a rope in his hands. "Grab hold," he bellowed, and she could hear him now, his voice cutting through the chaos. The rope snaked down toward her, and she reached for it with one hand while the other still clung to the rock face. "I cannot reach it," she screamed back, feeling the stone beneath her fingers give way another fraction. The cowboy did not hesitate. He tied the rope around his waist and began rappelling down the canyon wall toward her, his boots finding purchase on the slick rock face with the sureness of someone who had grown up in this unforgiving country. The water was at her waist now, tugging at her with insistent fingers trying to pull her into its deadly embrace. "Hold on," he shouted, and then his hand was there, strong and calloused, reaching for hers. "Take my hand." Wyatt looked up into his face for the first time and saw eyes the color of desert sage, fierce with determination, set in a face weathered by sun and wind and hard living. She let go of the rock and reached for him, and their hands connected with a force that sent a jolt through her entire body. His fingers closed around her wrist like iron, and she grabbed onto his forearm with her other hand, holding on with every ounce of strength she possessed. The water surged higher, trying to rip her away from him, but he held fast, his jaw set with the effort. "I have got you," he said through gritted teeth, and she believed him. Do not let go. She had no intention of letting go, ever. Even as he began hauling her up the canyon wall, even as her shoulders screamed in protest, and her sodden skirts threatened to drag her back down, she kept her grip on him. The world narrowed to the feel of his hand around hers, the only solid thing in a universe of chaos and churning water. They reached the rim together, both of them collapsing onto solid ground while his horse stood nearby, ears pricked forward with concern. The rope was still around his waist, still connecting them, and Wyatt found she could not make herself release his hand even though they were safe now. He seemed to notice, and instead of pulling away, he squeezed her hand gently and helped her sit up. "You are safe now," he said, his voice gentler than it had been during the rescue. "The water cannot reach us here." She nodded but still did not let go. Her whole body was trembling, and she was not sure if it was from the cold water or the shock of how close she had come to drowning or something else entirely, something to do with the way this stranger was looking at her. "My name is Vincent Ellis," he said, and she realized he was still holding her hand too, making no move to pull away even though propriety demanded it. "I've got a ranch about 5 miles north of here. We need to get you somewhere warm and dry before you catch your death." "Wyatt Vandermeer," she managed to say through chattering teeth. "I was traveling to Bisbee. My horse ran off." "We will find your horse tomorrow if she survived," Vincent said. He shrugged out of his jacket and draped it around her shoulders even though she was soaking wet and would ruin the leather. "Right now, we need to get you to safety. Can you ride?" she nodded, though in truth she was not certain her shaking legs would hold her. Vincent seemed to sense this because he kept hold of her hand as he helped her to her feet, and even when she was standing, he did not let go. He led her to his horse, a sturdy paint gelding with kind eyes, and before she could protest, he had lifted her into the saddle as easily as if she weighed nothing. He swung up behind her, reaching around her to gather the reins, and Wyatt found herself enclosed in the circle of his arms. She told herself it was necessary, that there was only one horse and they needed to ride double, but that did not explain the sense of rightness she felt leaning back against his chest, or the way her heart was racing now that they were out of danger. They rode in silence for a while, the horse picking its way carefully across the desert landscape. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and in the distance, Wyatt could see the silhouette of mountains against the horizon. Everything looked different from this perspective, sitting in front of this man who had risked his life to save hers. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "for saving my life." She felt him shift behind her, and his arms tightened slightly around her. "Could not very well let you drown," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her think he was trying to make light of what had been a genuinely dangerous rescue. "What were you doing riding alone in that canyon anyway? Flash floods are common this time of year." "I did not know," Wyatt admitted. "I am from back east, Boston originally. I only arrived in the Arizona Territory 2 weeks ago." That explained a lot, Vincent thought. Her clothes, though now ruined by the flood water, had clearly been expensive once, the kind of thing a wealthy Eastern lady would wear. Her hands, even roughened by her desperate grip on the rocks, were not the hands of someone accustomed to hard labor. "What was a woman like this doing out here alone? You are a long way from Boston," he said carefully. "What brings you to Arizona?" Wyatt was quiet for a moment, and Vincent wondered if he had overstepped. But then she spoke, her voice steady despite everything she had been through. "I came to stay with my aunt in Bisbee. My parents thought the climate would be good for my health. I have always been rather delicate," they said. Vincent thought about the way she had clung to that rock face, the strength in her grip when she had grabbed his hand, the determination in her eyes even when the water was rising around her. Delicate was not the word he would have chosen. "Your aunt must be worried sick," he said. "Were you expected today?" "Tomorrow," Wyatt said. "I stopped to camp last night at a way station, and the proprietor said it would be safe to cut through the canyon to save time. He did not mention anything about floods." "Probably figured you would have sense enough not to ride in a dry creek bed," Vincent said, then immediately regretted his bluntness. "I am sorry. That was unkind. You could not have known." But Wyatt surprised him by laughing, a sound that was only slightly hysterical around the edges. "No, you are right. I should have known better, or at least hired a guide. My aunt wrote to tell me to hire a guide, but I thought I could manage on my own. I have always been stubborn that way." The ranch appeared ahead of them as they crested a rise, a collection of buildings huddled against the desert like they were trying to shelter from the wind. It was not much to look at, Vincent knew, just a small house and a barn and a few outbuildings, but it was home, and it was dry and warm. "Here we are," he said. "It is not fancy, but you can rest here tonight and we will get word to your aunt in the morning." He helped her down from the horse, and for the second time, Wyatt found herself reluctant to let go of his hand. There was something about his presence that made her feel safe in a way she had never experienced before. Back in Boston, she had always been surrounded by servants and chaperones and family, but she had never felt truly protected until this cowboy had reached down into that canyon and pulled her to safety. The inside of the house was simple but clean, with a stone fireplace and handmade furniture that looked sturdy and well cared for. Vincent lit a fire while Wyatt stood dripping on the floor, still wrapped in his jacket. "I do not have any women's clothes," Vincent said, looking embarrassed. "But I can find you something dry to wear while we hang your things by the fire. There is a room in the back where you can change." He disappeared and returned with a shirt and a pair of trousers that would be far too large for her, but at least they were dry. Wyatt took them gratefully and retreated to the small bedroom he had indicated. Her fingers fumbled with the buttons of her soaked dress, still shaking from cold and shock, and it took her far longer than it should have to change into the borrowed clothes. When she emerged, Vincent had laid out her dress and petticoats by the fire and was stirring something in a pot that hung over the flames. He looked up when she entered, and something flickered in his eyes as he took in the sight of her in his clothes, her long dark hair hanging loose and damp around her shoulders. "Coffee will be ready soon," he said, his voice slightly rougher than before. "And I have got some stew left over from last night. You should eat something." Wyatt sat in the chair he offered her, so close to the fire that she could feel the heat beginning to seep back into her bones. Now that the immediate danger had passed, she was starting to feel the full impact of what had happened. She had nearly died today. If Vincent had not come along when he did, if he had not been brave enough to climb down into that canyon, she would be dead right now, her body swept away by the flood waters. "Are you all right?" Vincent asked, and she realized tears were streaming down her face. "I am sorry," she said, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "I am being foolish." "You are not being foolish," Vincent said firmly. He knelt beside her chair and once again his hand found hers, warm and solid and real. "You nearly drowned today. You are allowed to cry about it." So she did. She cried while Vincent held her hand and murmured soothing words, and when she finally stopped, she found that some of the tightness in her chest had eased. He brought her coffee and a bowl of stew, and though she had not thought she was hungry, she found herself eating every bite. "Better?" Vincent asked when she had finished, and she nodded. "Much better, thank you. You have been extraordinarily kind to a complete stranger." "Any decent person would have done the same," Vincent said, but Wyatt shook her head. "You risked your life for me. That is more than mere decency." Vincent looked uncomfortable with her gratitude, and he stood up to tend to the fire. "I have lived in this country all my life," he said. "My father had this ranch before me and his father before him. We know the dangers. Flash floods, rattlesnakes, outlaws, hostile Apache bands before the treaties. You learn to help people when you can because you never know when you will be the one who needs help. Have you ever needed help?" Wyatt asked, curious about this man who had appeared like some kind of guardian angel just when she needed him most. Vincent was quiet for a moment, staring into the flames. "Once," he said finally. "When I was 18, I got thrown from my horse during a cattle drive, broke my leg in 3 places. Would have died out there if one of the other hands had not stayed with me while someone else rode for the doctor. Man's name was Charlie Reeves. He kept me alive for 2 days in the middle of nowhere, fighting off coyotes and keeping me from dying of fever. I owed him my life after that." "What happened to him?" Wyatt asked softly. "He died 5 years ago. Pneumonia of all things. Survived countless dangers out here only to be taken by a winter cough." Vincent's voice was rough with old grief. "I was with him at the end. He told me to pay it forward, to help others the way he helped me. So that is what I try to do." Wyatt felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire or the coffee. This man was not just brave, he was good in a way that seemed rare in her experience. The men she had known back in Boston had been concerned with money and social standing, with appearances and propriety. Vincent was concerned with doing what was right, with helping people who needed help, with honoring the memory of a friend who had saved his life. "He would be proud of you," she said. "Charlie Reeves, he would be proud that you saved my life today." Vincent looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them that Wyatt could not quite name. It was there in the silence, in the way the firelight played across his face, in the way her heart had started beating faster again for entirely different reasons than fear. "You should rest," Vincent said, breaking the moment. "You have been through an ordeal. You can take my bed and I will sleep out here by the fire." "I cannot take your bed," Wyatt protested. "You have already done so much for me." "I insist," Vincent said firmly. "You are a guest in my home and you need proper rest. Besides, I have slept by the fire plenty of times." "It will not hurt me to do so again." Wyatt wanted to argue further, but exhaustion was catching up with her. Her body felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, and the thought of lying down on a real bed was almost irresistibly appealing. "All right," she conceded. "But tomorrow I will find a way to repay you for your kindness." "You do not owe me anything," Vincent said. "Just promise me you will not ride alone through any more canyons during monsoon season." She smiled at that, the first genuine smile since her ordeal had begun. "I promise." The bed was narrow but comfortable, and despite everything that had happened, Wyatt fell asleep almost immediately. She dreamed of rushing water and strong hands pulling her to safety, of desert sunsets and sage-green eyes that looked at her like she was something precious. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the small window, and she could hear the sound of someone moving around in the other room. For a moment, she was disoriented, not sure where she was or how she had gotten there. Then memory returned in a rush, and she sat up quickly, her heart pounding. She was alive. Vincent had saved her, and she was wearing his clothes in his house, which was probably the most improper thing she had ever done in her carefully regulated life. Her dress was still hanging by the fire when she emerged from the bedroom, and it was mostly dry though badly stained. Vincent was outside. She could see him through the window working near the barn, so she quickly changed back into her own clothes. They felt stiff and uncomfortable after the softness of his shirt, but at least they were proper. When she stepped outside, the morning air was already warm, promising another hot day. Vincent looked up from where he was saddling his horse and smiled at her, and Wyatt felt her breath catch in her throat. He was handsome, she realized, though she had been too terrified yesterday to really notice. Not handsome in the polished way of Boston gentlemen, but in a rougher, more elemental way. His face was all strong lines and weathered skin, and when he smiled, it lit up his eyes. "Morning," he said. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I expected, given everything," Wyatt admitted. "Thank you again for giving up your bed." "It was nothing. I made breakfast if you are hungry, just biscuits and bacon, nothing fancy." They ate together at the small table inside, and Wyatt found herself watching Vincent when she thought he was not looking. There was something about the way he moved, efficient and purposeful, like every action had meaning. He was completely at ease here in this harsh desert country, as much a part of the landscape as the saguaro cactus and the Rocky Mountains. "I thought we could ride out and look for your horse," Vincent said when they had finished eating. "Then I will take you to Bisbee to your aunt's house. It is only about 2 hours from here if we take the main road." The main road. Wyatt felt foolish all over again for trying to take the shortcut through the canyon. "That sounds good. I do hope we find my horse. She was a good mare." They found the horse less than a mile from where Wyatt had been swept away, grazing peacefully in a small valley as if nothing unusual had happened at all. The mare whinnied when she saw Wyatt, and Wyatt was surprised by the wave of relief she felt. She had only owned the horse for a few weeks, but she had grown fond of the gentle animal. "She seems fine," Vincent said after checking the mare over. "No injuries that I can see. She was smart to run for high ground." "Smarter than her rider," Wyatt said ruefully. Vincent's eyes were kind when he looked at her. "You survived. That is what matters." They rode toward Bisbee together, Wyatt on her own horse now with Vincent beside her on his paint gelding. The town appeared gradually as they traveled, first just a smudge on the horizon, then slowly resolving into buildings and streets as they drew closer. Bisbee was a mining town, Vincent explained, copper mostly, and it had grown considerably in recent years. It was rougher than what she was probably used to, he warned, but there were decent folks there too. Wyatt's aunt lived in a neat house on the edge of town, and she came rushing out before they had even dismounted, her face pale with worry. "Wyatt, thank heavens. When you did not arrive yesterday, I sent word to the way station, and they said you had left the day before. I have been beside myself with worry." Her aunt, Margaret Vickers, was a sturdy woman in her 50s with graying hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Those eyes took in Vincent and then returned to Wyatt with obvious questions. "I am sorry, Aunt Margaret. I took a shortcut through a canyon and got caught in a flash flood. I would have drowned if not for Mr. Ellis here. He saved my life." Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, my dear girl. Come inside at once. And you too, Mr. Ellis. I must hear the whole story, and I must thank you properly for saving my niece." Over tea and cake, Wyatt told the story of her rescue, with Vincent occasionally adding details. Margaret listened with growing horror, and when the tale was finished, she turned to Vincent with tears in her eyes. "I do not know how to thank you, Mr. Ellis. If anything had happened to Wyatt, I would never have forgiven myself for encouraging her to come west." "I am just glad I was there," Vincent said simply. "And please call me Vincent. Then you must call me Margaret. Will you stay for lunch? It is the least I can do." Vincent glanced at Wyatt, and she found herself hoping desperately that he would say yes. She was not ready to say goodbye to him yet, though she could not have explained exactly why. "I would be honored," Vincent said, and Wyatt felt a flutter of happiness in her chest. Lunch stretched into the afternoon as Margaret insisted on hearing more about Vincent's ranch and his life in the territory. He was a good storyteller, Wyatt discovered, with a dry sense of humor that made even difficult experiences sound amusing in retrospect. He had been running the ranch alone since his father died 3 years ago, he told them. It was hard work, but he loved the land and could not imagine living anywhere else. "You never get lonely?" Margaret asked. "Living out there all by yourself?" Vincent's eyes flickered to Wyatt for just a moment before he answered. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But I keep busy. There is always work to be done on a ranch." When it was time for him to leave, Wyatt walked him out to where his horse was tied. She felt suddenly awkward, unsure of what to say. "How did you say goodbye to someone who had saved your life? How did you thank them adequately for such a gift?" "I suppose this is farewell," Vincent said, and he sounded as reluctant as she felt. "If you need anything while you are staying in Bisbee, my ranch is not far. You are always welcome there." "I would like that," Wyatt said, and then, because she had always been the kind of person who spoke her mind, she added, "I would like to see you again, if that would be acceptable." Vincent's face broke into a smile that made him look years younger. "I would like that too, very much. Perhaps you could come to dinner next week. I am sure Aunt Margaret would be happy to have you." "I would be honored," Vincent said, and he took her hand, pressing it gently. The contact sent warmth racing through her, just as it had when he pulled her from the flood. "Until next week, then." Wyatt watched him ride away until he was just a speck on the horizon, and even then she stood there, her hand pressed to her heart, feeling like something important had just begun. The week that followed was the longest of Wyatt's life. She helped her aunt with household chores, explored the town of Bisbee, and tried not to think constantly about Vincent Ellis. She was mostly unsuccessful in that last endeavor. He seemed to have taken up permanent residence in her thoughts, appearing at odd moments when she should have been focused on other things. Margaret noticed, of course. "You seem distracted, dear," she commented one afternoon as they were preparing vegetables for dinner. "Are you thinking about that young cowboy who saved you?" Wyatt felt her cheeks flush. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who knows you well," Margaret said with a knowing smile. "He is a good man, Wyatt. I could see that right away. And the way he looked at you, well, I have not seen a young man look at a woman like that in quite some time." "How did he look at me?" Wyatt asked, her heart beating faster. "Like you were something miraculous, like he could not quite believe you were real." Margaret patted her hand. "It is the way your uncle used to look at me. God rest his soul. I think Mr. Ellis is quite taken with you." Wyatt hardly dared to hope. She had only known Vincent for a day, after all. Surely it was too soon to feel this way, this constant awareness of his absence, this longing to see him again. And yet she could not deny what she felt. From the moment he had reached down into that canyon and grabbed her hand, something had shifted in her world. She had not wanted to let go then, and she found she still did not want to let go, even though he was miles away. When the day of the dinner finally arrived, Wyatt changed her dress 3 times before settling on a blue cotton gown that brought out the color of her eyes. She told herself she was being ridiculous, that this was just a simple dinner to thank Vincent for his help, but her racing heart knew better. Vincent arrived right on time, cleaned up and wearing what were obviously his best clothes. His hair was still damp from washing, and he held his hat in his hands as Margaret welcomed him inside. His eyes sought out Wyatt immediately, and when they found her, his whole face lit up. "Miss Vandermeer," he said formally, "you look lovely." "Thank you, Mr. Ellis. Please call me Wyatt." "Only if you will call me Vincent." Dinner was a pleasant affair, with Margaret steering the conversation and Vincent regaling them with more stories about ranch life. But Wyatt was acutely aware of every time Vincent looked at her, every accidental brush of their hands when passing dishes, every smile he directed her way. After dinner, Margaret shooed them out to the porch, claiming she needed to clean up and would not accept any help. It was an obvious ploy to give them time alone, and Wyatt was grateful for her aunt's understanding. They sat on the porch swing, the evening air cooling down from the heat of the day. Somewhere in the distance, someone was playing a fiddle, and the sound drifted to them on the breeze. "I have thought about you every day this week," Vincent said quietly. "I hope that is not too forward of me to say." Wyatt's heart soared. "It is not too forward. I have thought about you too, constantly, if I am being honest." Vincent turned to look at her, and in his eyes she saw the same wonder she felt. "I have never believed much in fate," he said. "Always figured a man made his own luck in this world. But when I saw you hanging on that rock face with the water rising around you, when I reached down and pulled you up, something changed. I felt like I had been searching for something my whole life without knowing what it was, and suddenly there you were." "I felt it too," Wyatt whispered. "When I grabbed your hand, I knew I never wanted to let go. I know it sounds foolish. We barely know each other." "Then let us get to know each other," Vincent said. He took her hand, the same hand he had grabbed in the canyon, and held it gently. "I would like to court you properly, Wyatt Vandermeer, if you will have me." "Yes," Wyatt said without hesitation. "Yes, I would like that very much." Vincent smiled, and then he did something that made her breath catch. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, his eyes never leaving hers. "Then I will come back tomorrow, and the day after that, and every day you will allow me to visit." And he did. For the next 3 months, Vincent courted Wyatt with a dedication that made her fall more in love with him each day. He took her on rides through the desert, teaching her to read the land and understand its dangers and its beauty. He showed her his ranch and introduced her to his few remaining cattle. He brought her wildflowers that he picked himself and taught her the names of the plants and animals that called this harsh country home. In turn, Wyatt told him about her life in Boston, about the suffocating expectations of society there, about how she had never felt like she truly fit in among the drawing rooms and tea parties. She told him about her love of reading, about her secret dream of becoming a teacher, about how the Arizona Territory, despite its dangers, felt more like home than Boston ever had. They talked for hours, about everything and nothing, and Wyatt discovered that Vincent was not just brave and kind. He was intelligent and thoughtful, with a deep understanding of the world that came from hard experience rather than books. He listened when she spoke, really listened, and he valued her opinions in a way the men back east never had. Margaret watched their courtship with approval, though she did warn Wyatt that life on a remote ranch would be hard. "Are you prepared for that, dear? It is not an easy life, being a rancher's wife." "I am prepared," Wyatt said firmly. "I would rather be with Vincent in a small ranch house than without him in the finest mansion in Boston." It was true. She had never been more certain of anything in her life. Vincent had shown her what real partnership looked like, what it meant to be truly seen and valued. When she was with him, she felt like the best version of herself, brave and capable and strong. 5 months after he pulled her from the flood, Vincent took Wyatt back to the canyon where they had met. It had been dry for weeks now, just a sandy creek bed with no hint of the danger it could pose. They dismounted and walked down into the canyon, and Vincent pointed to the spot where he had found her. "Right there," he said. "You were hanging onto that outcropping and the water was almost up to your shoulders. I have never been so scared in my life." "You did not show it," Wyatt said. "You seemed so calm, so certain." "I had to be for your sake, but inside I was terrified I would not reach you in time." Vincent took both of her hands in his. "Wyatt Vandermeer, I told you I never believed much in fate, but I cannot deny that something brought me to this place at exactly the right moment. Something wanted us to find each other, and now that I have found you, I do not ever want to let you go." He dropped to one knee right there in that dry canyon, and Wyatt felt tears spring to her eyes. "I know I do not have much to offer you," Vincent continued. "Just a small ranch and a simple life and a man who loves you more than he ever thought possible to love another person. But if you will have me, I promise to spend every day of the rest of my life making you happy. Will you marry me, Wyatt?" "Yes," Wyatt said, pulling him to his feet and throwing her arms around him. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Vincent kissed her then, the first real kiss they had shared, though there had been many sweet stolen moments before. But this kiss was different, full of promise and joy and the certainty of a future together. They were married in November of 1887 in the small church in Bisbee, with Margaret crying happy tears and several of Vincent's neighboring ranchers in attendance. Wyatt wore a simple white dress that she and Margaret had made together, and Vincent wore a new suit that he looked slightly uncomfortable in, though Wyatt thought he had never looked more handsome. The wedding night was spent at the ranch, their ranch now, and Wyatt felt no nervousness as Vincent carried her over the threshold. This was where she belonged, with this man who had saved her life and captured her heart. "Are you happy?" Vincent asked her as they stood together in the house that was now her home. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be," Wyatt said honestly. "I feel like my life really started the day you pulled me out of that flood. Everything before was just waiting for this." Life on the ranch was hard. just as Margaret had warned, but Wyatt found she did not mind. She learned to cook on the wood stove, to tend the vegetable garden she planted, to help with the cattle when Vincent needed an extra pair of hands. Her hands grew calloused, and her skin tanned despite her best efforts with bonnets and long sleeves. She became stronger, more capable, more herself than she had ever been in Boston. Vincent was a wonderful husband, patient and kind and always willing to teach her the things she needed to know. He never made her feel foolish for not knowing something, never talked down to her or dismissed her ideas. When she suggested they could make extra money by raising chickens and selling eggs in town, he helped her build a chicken coop. When she said she wanted to learn to rope cattle, he taught her patiently until she could throw a decent loop. They worked side by side during the days and held each other close at night, and Wyatt thought she had never known it was possible to be this content. She wrote long letters to her parents in Boston, trying to explain her happiness, though she suspected they would never truly understand. They had wanted her to marry some wealthy merchant or banker, to live a life of ease and comfort. Instead, she had married a cowboy and was living in what they would consider primitive conditions. But she would not have traded her life for anything. Their first winter together was challenging. There was a cold snap that killed several of their cattle, and money was tight. Wyatt sold most of her jewelry from her old life in Boston to help make ends meet, and she did not regret it for a moment. They were things, just things, and she had Vincent. That was all that mattered. By spring, things were looking up. The cattle that survived the winter were thriving, and Wyatt's egg business was bringing in steady income. They were not wealthy by any means, but they had enough, and they had each other. It was in May, almost a year after Vincent had saved her from the flood, that Wyatt realized she was pregnant. She waited to tell him until she was certain, and then she surprised him one evening after dinner. "Vincent," she said, taking his hand, "I have some news." He looked at her with concern. "Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong. Everything is wonderfully right." She placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby." Vincent's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: shock, disbelief, wonder, and finally pure joy. "A baby! We are going to have a baby." "Yes," Wyatt said, laughing at his reaction. "In about 6 months, if I have calculated correctly." Vincent picked her up and spun her around, then immediately set her down, looking worried. "I am sorry. Should I not have done that? I do not want to hurt you or the baby." "We are fine," Wyatt assured him. "I am not made of glass." But Vincent was impossibly gentle with her after that, insisting she not do any heavy work and fussing over her constantly. Wyatt found it both endearing and occasionally frustrating, but she loved him all the more for his concern. Margaret was overjoyed at the news and insisted on helping Wyatt prepare for the baby. They spent hours sewing tiny clothes and blankets, talking about names and making plans. It was during one of these afternoons that Margaret said something that stuck with Wyatt. "You know, dear, I never thought I would see you this happy. When you first arrived from Boston, you seemed so lost, like you were searching for something but did not know what it was. And then you nearly drowned and Vincent saved you, and it was like you finally found your purpose." "He did save me," Wyatt agreed. "In more ways than one. I think I was drowning long before that flood, drowning in expectations and propriety and a life that was never meant for me. Vincent pulled me out of that too." The baby came on a cold December night, 2 weeks earlier than expected. Vincent rode through the darkness to fetch the midwife from town while Wyatt labored at home with Margaret beside her. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when Wyatt understood why women feared childbirth. But when she finally held her son in her arms, red-faced and squalling, she thought it had been worth every moment of pain. Vincent burst back into the house with the midwife, just as the baby was being cleaned up. He looked terrified, his eyes wild with worry, but when he saw Wyatt sitting up in bed with their son in her arms, his whole body seemed to sag with relief. "You are all right?" he asked, coming to kneel beside the bed. "Both of you, we are perfect," Wyatt said. "Come meet your son." Vincent looked down at the tiny baby with an expression of such wonder that it brought tears to Wyatt's eyes. "A son," he whispered. "We have a son." They named him Charles after the man who had saved Vincent's life all those years ago, the man who had taught him the importance of helping others. Charlie, they called him, and he was the image of his father, with Vincent's dark hair and strong features. Being a mother was harder than Wyatt had expected, but also more rewarding. She was exhausted constantly those first few months, but every time Charlie smiled at her, every milestone he reached, made her heart swell with love. Vincent was a devoted father, getting up with the baby at night despite working hard all day, playing with him for hours, talking to him constantly, even though Charlie was too young to understand. "You are going to spoil him," Wyatt teased one afternoon, watching Vincent make silly faces to get the baby to laugh. "That is what fathers are for," Vincent replied, not taking his eyes off his son. "Besides, he is the most perfect baby that ever existed. He deserves to be spoiled." 2 years later, their daughter was born, and they named her Caroline Margaret, after both of her grandmothers. Where Charlie had been an easy baby, Caroline was colicky and demanding, but Vincent loved her just as fiercely. Wyatt would often find him walking the floor with her in the middle of the night, singing old cowboy songs to soothe her. Life fell into a rhythm. The ranch slowly prospered, allowing them to build a larger house and expand their herd. Wyatt's egg business grew into a thriving operation, and she was able to hire a local girl to help her with some of the work. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep when Caroline was 3 years old. It was a loss that hit Wyatt hard, but she found comfort in Vincent's steady presence, and in the knowledge that her aunt had lived to see her happily settled with a family of her own. Over the years, Vincent and Wyatt became pillars of the small community around Bisbee. Vincent was known as a fair and honest man, always willing to help a neighbor in need. Wyatt started a small school in their home, teaching the children of nearby ranchers and miners to read and write, finally fulfilling the dream she had once told Vincent about during their courtship. Charlie grew into a strong, capable boy who loved the ranch as much as his father did. He learned to ride almost before he could walk and was helping with the cattle by the time he was 8. Caroline was different, more interested in books and learning than in ranching. But Vincent encouraged her curiosity just as much as he encouraged Charlie's practical skills. "Every person has their own gifts," he told Wyatt one evening as they watched Caroline read by lamplight while Charlie was outside checking on a pregnant cow. "Our job is to help them discover what those gifts are and how to use them, not to force them into roles they were not meant for." Wyatt thought about how different her life would have been if her own parents had felt that way, and she was grateful all over again for the man she had married. When Charlie was 12 and Caroline was 10, Wyatt gave birth to another son, Thomas. It was an unexpected pregnancy, and at first, Wyatt had worried about having another baby when she was in her mid-30s. But Thomas was a sweet, easy baby who seemed determined to make up for all the trouble Caroline had caused as an infant. The children knew the story of how their parents met, of course. It had become something of a family legend, the tale of how their father had rescued their mother from a flash flood and how she had grabbed his hand and never wanted to let go. "Tell it again," Caroline would beg, even though she had heard it dozens of times. And Vincent would tell it again, his eyes finding Wyatt's across the room, both of them remembering that terrifying, wonderful day that had changed everything. As the years passed and the children grew, Vincent and Wyatt grew older together. There were hard times, certainly. Years of drought that tested their resolve. Illnesses that scared them. The constant challenge of making a life in an unforgiving land. But through it all, they had each other. And that made everything bearable. On their 20th anniversary, Vincent took Wyatt back to the canyon one more time. They were both older now, with lines on their faces and gray in their hair, but when Vincent took her hand, Wyatt felt the same jolt she had felt that first time. 20 years, Vincent said, looking at the spot where he had pulled her from the water. 20 years since the best day of my life. The day you saved my life, Wyatt said. No, Vincent corrected her. The day you saved mine. I was just existing before you, Wyatt, going through the motions. You gave me purpose, gave me love, gave me a family. You are the one who did the saving. Wyatt kissed him there in the canyon, surrounded by the harsh beauty of the desert they both loved, and she knew with absolute certainty that she would do it all again in a heartbeat. Every moment of fear, every hardship, every challenge had been worth it to have this life with this man. As they rode back to the ranch together, she thought about the girl she had been, fresh from Boston and so naive about the realities of the West. That girl had been searching for something, though she had not known what. She had been drowning in her old life, suffocating under the weight of expectations and propriety. And then a flash flood had come, and a cowboy had reached down into that churning water, and she had grabbed his hand. She had grabbed on and never let go, and he had pulled her into a life more full and rich and real than anything she could have imagined. Charlie took over more and more of the ranch work as he got older, preparing to inherit the place one day. Caroline went to college in Tucson, one of the first women to do so, and came back with plans to open a proper school in Bisbee. Thomas, the baby, turned out to have a gift with horses and started a side business breaking and training them for other ranchers. Vincent and Wyatt watched their children grow into capable, good-hearted adults, and they knew they had done something right. On quiet evenings, they would sit together on the porch of their house, watching the sun set over the desert and talk about everything and nothing, the same as they always had. You ever wonder what your life would have been like if you had stayed in Boston? Vincent asked once. Never, Wyatt said honestly. Not once have I regretted leaving. That was not my life, Vincent. This is my life. You are my life. When Charlie married a sweet girl from town and brought her home to the ranch, Wyatt saw the same look in her son's eyes that she had once seen in Vincent's. Charlie looked at his new wife like she was something precious and miraculous, and Wyatt knew that the lessons Vincent had taught their son about love and respect and partnership had taken root. Caroline married a schoolteacher from Tucson and stayed in the city, opening her school and making a name for herself as an educator. She visited often, bringing her husband and, eventually, her own children to stay at the ranch. Thomas married late, to a widow with 3 children of her own, and together they built a life full of noise and love and the kind of chaos that came from blending 2 families into one. As Vincent and Wyatt grew older, as their children had children and those children grew, they remained each other's constant. They had good years and bad years, years of plenty and years of hardship, but through it all, they had each other. On their 40th anniversary, Vincent was 72 and Wyatt was 70. They celebrated with their children and grandchildren gathered around, a house full of love and laughter. After everyone had gone home, Vincent took Wyatt's hand, the same hand he had grabbed so many years ago in that canyon. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" Wyatt asked. "For grabbing my hand. For not letting go. for building this life with me. For 40 years of being loved by the most remarkable woman I have ever known." Wyatt felt tears prick her eyes. "I would do it all again," she said. "Every moment, every challenge, all of it just to be with you." They had 15 more years together after that. 15 years of watching grandchildren grow and great-grandchildren arrive. 15 years of sunsets on the porch and quiet conversations, and the kind of love that only deepened with time. When Vincent died at 87, it was peacefully in his sleep, with Wyatt beside him just as she had been for 55 years. She held his hand as he took his last breath, and even then she did not want to let go. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Arizona territory, people whose lives Vincent had touched over the years. They told stories of his kindness, his fairness, his willingness to help anyone who needed it. Charlie spoke about his father's love for his family, Caroline about his encouragement of her dreams, Thomas about his patience and wisdom. But it was Wyatt, at 85 years old, who told the story one more time. The story of a flash flood and a cowboy who climbed down into a canyon to save her life. The story of grabbing his hand and never wanting to let go. The story of a love that had lasted a lifetime. "He saved me that day," Wyatt said to the gathered crowd, her voice still strong despite her years. "But what he really gave me was a life worth living. He showed me what love really is, what partnership really means. He gave me a home, a family, a purpose. And I loved him from the moment I grabbed his hand until this very moment, and I will love him until the day I join him again." Wyatt lived for 3 more years after Vincent's death, long enough to see Charlie's first great-grandchild born, long enough to attend Caroline's retirement ceremony at her school, long enough to see Thomas's youngest son graduate from college. But everyone knew that part of her had gone with Vincent, that she was just waiting for the day when she could take his hand again. She died quietly one spring afternoon, sitting in the chair on the porch of the ranch, looking out at the desert she had come to love so much. Her children found her there, a peaceful smile on her face, and they knew she was finally reunited with the man who had saved her life all those years ago. They buried her beside Vincent, on a hill overlooking the ranch where they had built their life together. On the headstone, underneath their names and dates, Charlie had inscribed a single line. She grabbed his hand and never let go. And it was true. Even death had not made her let go. Their love had transcended time and circumstance, had weathered every storm, had grown stronger with each passing year. It was the kind of love that people told stories about, that grandchildren and great-grandchildren would speak of with wonder. The ranch continued on, passed down through the generations, each new owner learning the story of Vincent and Wyatt, of the flash flood that had brought them together, of the love that had sustained them through everything. The canyon where Vincent had saved Wyatt's life became a sort of family shrine, a place where the descendants of that remarkable couple would go to remember and to honor the love that had started their family line. And sometimes, on summer evenings when the monsoons threatened and the air was thick with the promise of rain, people swore they could see 2 figures riding together across the desert, hand in hand, still together even after death had parted them. It was probably just a trick of the light, a mirage caused by the heat and the approaching storms. But the children who grew up hearing the story of Vincent and Wyatt liked to think it was really them, still riding together through the land they had loved, still holding hands, still refusing to let go. Because some loves are strong enough to transcend death itself, and the love between a cowboy who reached into a flood to save a woman's life and the woman who grabbed his hand and never let go was surely one of those loves. Their story became legend in that part of Arizona, told and retold until it was hard to separate fact from embellishment. But the essential truth remained the same. That on a summer day in 1887, during a flash flood in a remote canyon, two people had found each other in the most dramatic way possible, and that chance encounter had blossomed into a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. The lesson of their story was simple but profound. That sometimes the most terrifying moments in our lives are the ones that lead us to our greatest happiness, that reaching out when someone needs help can change not just their life but your own, and that real love, once found, is something you hold onto with all your strength and never, ever let go.